Welcome back to Powered by Play. I'm Drew, and I'm a professor of theater at Chapman University in Southern California.
I'm Avery, and I'm a theatrical scenic designer. Every month on this podcast, we explore what we play, how we play, and why we play.
We believe play powers us, and that's what makes it powerful.
All right, Drew.
All right, Avery.
Press play.
Avery, let me start with a knock-knock joke. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Spell.
Spell who?
Well, okay. W-H-O.
Oh. That's so funny. I said O at the same time that you said O, but my O was realizing what that was. Very funny, Drew. Very funny.
Thank you. So this month we're going to explore the role of the Joker, from joke teller to trickster to prankster to facilitator. I think that we'll try to answer some questions like what's funny and why, and how much does joking matter, and how can jokers become serious? There's a lot going on, and I think we are ready. Avery, want to kick it off? What is a joker?
From the textbook Performance Studies, an introduction by Richard Schechner, who is our favorite performance studies textbook that we've quoted so many times.
Yeah.
In this book, he quotes Victor Turner as calling play the joker in the deck, meaning that play is both indispensable and untrustworthy. So in this sense, he's indicating the joker as a symbol of play, where play is a mood, it's an activity, it's a spontaneous eruption. It can be rule-bound and free, or not as free due to the rules. Everyone plays and watches others play, such as when they're watching dramas, sports, TV, or films, or having parties. You can even play while you're working, play on the street, on the playgrounds, everywhere. And we went over a lot of these ideas during our first episode of what is play. But the Joker is kind of a symbol of this, and we're gonna kind of expand on this throughout the episode. One of the areas of theater that involves a Joker is theater of the oppressed, which is a theater method discovered and created by Augusto Boal, a Brazilian theater maker. And in this theater method, the Joker is basically a sort of facilitator between the actors and the spectators. And just a reminder as to what spectators are, well, you have spectators and then you have actors. But spectators are what kind of comes about throughout the theater of the oppressed method that combines being an audience member and being a performer of a devised theater piece. So I looked at Theater of the Oppressed, specifically the New York City chapter, I suppose. They do a lot of forum theater, which involves community members coming in and devising and performing plays based on their challenges confronting economic inequality, racism, and other social health and human rights injustices. At each performance, actors and audiences engage in theatrical brainstorming with the aim of catalyzing creative change on individual, community, and political levels. So how does the Joker fall into this? So on their website, they do express that, and they explain that the Joker is the facilitator of the theater of the oppressed experience. So in rehearsals and workshops, and I'm quoting directly from the website, the Joker guides actors through games and exercises to investigate shared experiences of oppression. In their troupes, the Joker helps actors develop scenes to share their experiences with an audience. And at other forums, or part of their other legislative theater performance, the Joker's role is part MC, part moderator of the forum, where the audience or spectators discuss the oppressions in the play that they were part of, and then enter to scenes to improvise creative strategies after. So because they're alluding to the symbol of the Joker, they're also alluding to the fact that Jokers, as an idea, they don't belong to any suit. They're kind of a wild card, and they're interchangeable in terms of their value and rank, but they don't really have a rank at all. And so they're both inside and outside the theater space. They're going in between the roles of performer and player. They're trying to help people explore their roles in these devised pieces, but they're also exploring themselves with the people too. And they're trying to ultimately identify biases or problematic ideas where reality meets imaginality and magicness. So there's a lot of potential for this Joker figure during Theater of the Oppressed to bring out what our players of these theater things are bringing into the workshop or the piece itself. And I know a lot about this because I learned about this through your class, Drew, Theater for Social Change.
Theater for Social Change, one of my favorite classes. It truly is.
Hmm.
I think that hopefully Boal's techniques are still making waves around the world. I think now is a great time for Boal's structures and games and forum theater to be picked up and used by people worldwide. So hope that's
Yeah.
happening. When I think of a Joker, the first thing I think of is a person who's fun, a person who makes us laugh, someone who tells jokes. I think also we might think of a Joker as someone with secrets, someone who is hiding information or hiding pain. Sometimes there are many, many stories about that people who are very good at stand up comedy have had painful events happen in their lives. And so humor is the way that they deal with that. Muhammad Ali, the great boxer, had a wonderful quote. He said, "My way of joking is to tell the truth. That's the funniest joke in the world." And I love this quote. I wonder
Yeah.
how much jokes are not supposed to be taken seriously or how much they are supposed to be taken seriously. The common comeback to when somebody says, "Hey, what you just said hurt my feelings," or was hurtful, can be, "But I was only joking. It was just a joke. Can't you take a joke?" And I think we're starting to explore that, hopefully now more in 2025 than we have in the past, and how words can be weapons, how words can be instances of power play. We'll talk about that a little further on as well. I think that they're also, when I think of Jokers, I think of comic relief. Who are the Joker characters who exist in a story to lighten the mood or take or give a listener or an audience member a break from something? So I'm thinking of of course, the great Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender, who is always talking about tea and food and hanging out in a hot spring, or basically he was a great general and now he is helping his nephew, and he's trying to help his nephew figure out who he is and who he wants to be and whether he's going to make a change in the Fire Nation. But along the way, there's going to be lots of talk about tea and maybe even setting up a tea shop in Ba Sing Se. Uncle
Hmm.
Iroh, one of the greatest.
Yes.
I also think of the droids in Star Wars, particularly in the original trilogy, C3PO and R2D2. So there's a rebellion going on. I mean, this is serious stuff. And R2D2 and C3PO were arguing about things like, "Don't say that. I can't believe you would say that to me, R2." And R2, of course, only speaks in beep, beep, whir, stuff like that. And so they have little squabbles, and they are clearly trying to bring the humor. So is the relief that these characters bring from high emotion, do we need a little levity in order to kind of balance out the high emotion that we're feeling, or the high drama, or fear, or sadness? I wonder. But I also think of Jokers as almost sometimes self appointed comic relief.
Yeah, it's Self-appointed is a really good way of putting that. And I think that's also what comedians are themselves in reality, like jesters. Well, I guess jesters back then were appointed by the king and
Yeah.
monarchy, but
They had to
they
be good
had
at what they
they,
did, though.
yeah, exactly. They must have had something special that they were appointed by royalty to entertain really powerful people. And I like that nowadays comedy is much more democratic, I suppose. My favorite comedian is Josh Johnson, and he definitely tells the truth during his comedy, but he also loves poking fun at society and those in power, at himself, and at his heart, he's a really good storyteller. And aside from that, I've always really loved sarcastic humor growing up. As soon as I learned what sarcasm was from my older sister, I was like, oh, this is fun. I enjoy this. And I always liked doing deprecating humor against others. Like, gosh, why are you so, or just like light bullying, basically. And I'll explain, but it's like, wow, you can't even put the dishes away that fast. Gosh, and you call yourself an older sibling? I don't know, just like something like that. And it was just a light way of bullying each other growing up that was just part of our sense of humor. And I sometimes I still I'm like a 50-50 though. Like I cannot always tell when people are being sarcastic. Sometimes I can, sometimes I cannot. So that's just another sign that humor is not really it's not necessarily universal. Can it has to like land, I guess, with somebody. It's very contextual. And I've met a lot of people and friends who don't like myself, my not my they don't like my deprecating humor against them. And I learned that the hard way as a teenager when I made one of I made one of my friends cry when I made a sarcastic joke at their expense. And ever since then, I was like, "Oh, this is real. I can't just do this with just anybody. I have to be more careful about this." And so ever since I've been a lot more careful about, making jokes about other people. One of my favorite plays is Poor Yellow Rednecks by Wee Nguyen. And at the beginning of this, well, it's about Vietnamese immigrants who have come to Arkansas basically as a result of the war. They were displaced, and now they're trying to make a home for themselves in the United States. And at the beginning of this play, an actor playing the playwright introduces the play. He gives the curtain speech, and then he talks to the character of the mother. And the mother is, born from Vietnam, so of course, at the beginning, her English is broken. But she tells the playwright, I have a few rules if you want to interview me and tell my story. Let me tell you what kind of story that the white people want to hear, because only white people like to watch a play. First of all, it's to start off as a joke. That's a cool joke because it pokes a joke at the theater audience themselves who are watching that play, and it gets them to think about, the demographics that attend theater, which is an actual, an issue in the world. So the mother's three rules are: one, the story that you tell about me has to be true and complex, not just fun and romance. Two, if this is going to be my play, I want all the white people to sound like the way that I hear them. Let them hear all the stupid stuff they say. This is a quote from the play. And so as soon as she says this, the playwright is like, "All right, cool, we'll do this." And then for the rest of the show, all of the white characters, when they're speaking English, or actually when anybody is speaking English at all, they say stuff like, "Yeehaw, get her done, I reckon." And at one point, the kid character who's trying to learn English, he eventually says, "I will not Hulk Hogan the honky tonk piggly wiggles at Saved by the Bell," which translates to, "I will not kick kids at school," basically. And I it's such every time somebody speaks English in this play, it becomes the comedy. So it's basically it's a power reversal, because when people of other countries with other native languages are trying to speak English in this country, typically white people make fun of them. They make jokes at their expense. So now the playwright is flipping that and saying, all right, this goes into the mother's third rule is that I want to talk good. I want to talk like the way you talk. And the playwright says, are you sure about that? Because I have a potty mouth. And she's like, yep. And so there's also a lot of swearing throughout the play for fun. And that also adds to like the contemporariness of it and the comedy, and how now we as the audience are able to completely understand what the Vietnamese characters are saying in Vietnamese, and we get to enjoy their story the way that they want their story to be enjoyed. And writing comedy like this is truly a skill, and I definitely applaud Queen Nguyen for this.
Oh man, such a great play. Both Viet Cong and Poor Yellow
Yes.
Rednecks.
Yes.
Such great plays.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about what makes me laugh and what makes other people laugh. So you were talking about sarcasm. That's great. And my dad was a pretty sarcastic guy. He also, well, he's still alive. He is a sarcastic guy. I'm thinking about childhood. He also had some very dark humor in childhood, and so I kind of was exposed to that as well. My parents also loved British humor, and so my sister and I got a lot of dry wit. We got a lot of Monty Python, for example, and I think that has served us well. I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
of different types of jokes, puns, wordplay. I There's a big debate about should you only punch up when you're doing comedy, meaning should you only make fun of people who have more power than you? And I think that there is a real question about punching down. Recently, on Saturday Night Live, the comic Shane Gillis was invited back. I have some very strong issues with why they invited Shane Gillis back, but he did some comedy that was absolutely 100% punching down, including something that referenced getting somebody roofied and available for sexual assault, and then talked about Bill Cosby. I was frankly just shocked. And I don't think that I'm a prude or I'm overly sensitive. I just of course, that's me saying this, but I just kind of wonder what is the purpose? What is the purpose of punching down at somebody who you already have more power than? So are you just trying to reestablish that power and dominance? Does Shane Gillis have some broken places that he's trying to mend? If you talk to a psychologist, they might say, oh yeah, definitely. And then I also love Hannah Gatsby. Hannah Gatsby, of course, made waves a few years ago with talking about her own experience as a queer woman in New Zealand and how she starts off the set by self-deprecating, making jokes about, oh, this is me as someone on the spectrum, this is me as a queer woman who was sort of trying to navigate life. And then about halfway through, she pivots and she says, I'm not going to self-deprecate anymore. I'm done with that. And from now on, these jokes are going to be about something else. And so she starts punching up rather than punching herself, essentially. I like Nate Bargatze. I know he's huge right now. And I just went to see him with my partner Rose and with my friend Christian Sider, both of whom have been guests on this show. And I'm telling you, Bargatze was just absolutely hilarious. We were at the Brea Improv, and oh my gosh, Avery, I sound like an old person. Nate Bargatze was just absolute. That young man can tell a joke. All right, now I'm being self deprecating. He was trying out new material. So I had never actually seen a comic with kind of a pad of paper trying out new jokes and referencing the piece of paper and then telling the audience, well, that didn't go the way I thought it was going to, or, well, I better add something like that for the Netflix special. I don't know. I love the Bargatze George Washington SNL stuff where he is George Washington. He's talking about how he's going to create a new America that will have all these special things and like we're going to have a hot dog. What is that, sir? It's not a dog. All right, sir, but what is it? It's a sausage. But shouldn't we just call it a sausage? No, we are Americans and we will call it a hot dog. And stuff like I mean, it's great. So, yeah, absolutely. The history of comedy, you were talking about jesters being able to make fun of the king, the only character who can make fun of the king. In Italy during the Renaissance, Commedia dell'arte, making fun of people who thought perhaps a little too much of themselves. And then in the modern era, I don't know, Avery, we get into, say, the Victorian era or somewhere around there, and we start to get very mean jokes and ethnic jokes. And those persist for a while, of course, in theater. We have blackface and we have minstrel shows and minstrelsy. Clearly aimed at punching down to the either enslaved or now freed black folks who were now full citizens of America. And these ethnic jokes, I think they persisted into the civil rights period. As you point out, newcomers to the United States still get made fun of as they are learning English, struggling with customs. And so I wonder if we now have, as a response to those mean jokes, misogynistic jokes, ethnic jokes, we have the rise of the dad joke. So dad jokes are clean. They're not mean. They might have some kind of absurdity. I know that they're typically talked about as maybe not as funny as they should be. My friend Matthew, my game playing friend Matthew, who I've talked about on the show before, he said, "Oh man, your daughter's coming home from spring break. That means you're going to be full of dad jokes, doesn't it?" And I had to respond, "Well, I think I got to get a few more put in the dad joke bank." And so, Avery, I present to you my favorite dad joke.
Okay.
Avery, I was going to tell you a joke about time travel,
Hmm.
but you didn't like it.
There's drama in that.
There's drama! I know. My old playwriting teacher, Sherry Kramer, said every joke has what she called a perception shift, where you are sort of going down one direction, and then what you think is going to happen flips. And so now you have to deal with, oh, I have to look at what the person said in a completely different
Hmm.
way. And so she always encouraged us to look for places in our playwriting
Mm.
where we could put in perception shifts. Exactly like Poor Yellow Rednecks, where you start to understand, okay, this isn't a straight sort of biographical play. This is a play that Nguyen has constructed very carefully in order to honor his
Hmm.
parents.
In a very fun way.
So there you
Yes.
go. I don't know. What do you think? What is your favorite kind of humor?
I have enjoyed dark humor a lot. Watching shows like BoJack Horseman and the Netflix series The End of the Effing World
Oh yeah.
and yeah, and Killing Eve.
Oh,
I
Killing Eve,
yeah,
man.
the dark humor that was in those was very I how would you describe dark humor?
Well, I always think of it as there are things that scare us. There are fears that we have just every day. And one of the only ways to manage that fear is to laugh back at it or to try to own
Mm,
it. And so when Villanelle is killing someone in a very specific way, and you can
mm,
kind of see how she is thinking about this particular assassination. I think it helps you deal with that people do horrible things, and you think about ideas of justice or fear. Could there be someone who is planning something evil near you? And so Villanelle just kind of says, well, they're not going to get away with it.
Yeah, where she's in the middle of being about to kill someone and she's like, who makes these sheets? They're really nice. And
Yeah,
then
totally.
after the deed, she goes and purchases the sheets for herself.
100%.
Yeah. Another very widespread environment for the Joker to thrive is reality TV shows, especially ones with competitions, such as I know, what was that one? Cutthroat Kitchen was one of the ones that I watched growing up with, I think it was Alton Brown as the host. And I always remember how he would be watching, one of the cooks doing something, and he would give like some academic explanation as to why he wouldn't do that himself, why they're not doing so great. But and then the judges come on, and then that's where like the drama unfolds even further. And my favorite version of the reality TV show Joker is the Great British Bake Off, where the comedy hosts of that show have just been the quintessential idea of the Joker to me. All the way from the moment they say, "Welcome to the Great British Bake Off," to comedically explaining the judges' demands, to poking fun at everybody on screen, whether it's the judges or the bakers or even themselves, and just like making friends with the bakers. Like they look like they have a really fun job. They just kind of it looks like they're just messing around half the time and breaking things on set. Like on the recent series, I think Noel accidentally smashed one of the baker's bowls of dough that they needed. And even then, even though they do all this wacky stuff, when the bakers are starting to cry or panic or emotionally struggle with what they're doing, or even physically struggle with what they're doing, the comedy hosts are instantly there and they're like, "Hey, what's going on? How are you feeling?" And they try to lighten the mood with jokes, or they're even able to take on a more serious tone, a more calming or nurturing tone of being like, "Hey, it's all right. It's just some bread. You've done this a million times." Or even if they need it, "Hey, do you want to take a step outside the tent and walk with me for a bit?" And then, afterwards the bakers can come back and usually it appears that they're feeling better. And I really enjoy the camaraderie that happens on this show because it's definitely not an American show where everybody's fighting each other for $1 million. And instead, the bakers are even like being kind to each other and helping each other out when they're struggling. And I think the comedy hosts of this show are such an important part of facilitating this environment of kindness and joy for baking that is really not replicated in a lot of other shows. Another example of our amazing jokers as facilitators is the dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons. And I've watched a lot of Dimension 20 and Critical Role, they are online series of Dungeons and Dragons games, and just the immaculate skill and joy and sense of play that it takes to facilitate an entire imaginative experience for the players and the audience watching the players and the dungeon master is just amazing. I could never. Maybe I could try, but I don't think I could twist my words into such fantastical scenes of climbing mountains and defeating evil monsters and playing a bunch of different characters too. And it also reminds me of like in theater, there's a lot of one person shows where oh my gosh, John
On Leguizamo?
yeah, John Leguizamo. It was Latin history for moron.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, where he was playing a bunch of different characters to tell this story too. And it's funny how I'm just drawing parallels to one person shows with Dungeons and Dragons, but it's really impressive to be able to play so many different characters and tell so many different stories with just you and your voice and your body.
Absolutely. And I think that by extension, by the way, my favorite pairing is Allison and Noel
Oh,
for Bake
yeah,
Off.
yeah.
I think that the moment they added Allison and they took off Matt, I was just so happy because Allison was exactly the ingredient, pun intended, that show needed. And I absolutely love watching her chemistry with Noel, and then also the way that she offers something completely different to the bakers from what Noel offers.
Yeah.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. I love the current
Yeah.
pairing.
Oh, and one more thing too is that it's such a simple cooking show, but also the amount of sexual jokes that everybody is like subtly making
Oh my
sometimes. Like
gosh.
whenever they're talking about buns, everybody's just like trying to hold back
Yes.
laughter and they're like, "So, what do you think of your buns?" And it's just it's like slightly raunchy humor that kind of adds intrigue for the audience watching too.
Yes, absolutely. I think that another character who is on the stage, just like we can call Dungeons and Dragons a stage of the mind, probably, or we can talk about Leguizamo or other solo performers as performers on the stage. The MC who invites you in, the first one I'll talk about is from Cambodian Rock Band. Just finished, I think it just finished its run at East West Players in Little Tokyo, Los Angeles.
Ah,
One of the longest running theaters in America and the longest running people of color theater in the state. So shout out to East West Players, always
yes.
amazing. And the MC for Cambodian Rock Band does not tell you who he is at the beginning, but he welcomes you in and he says, "Welcome to Cambodia." When you think of Cambodia, you probably think of something like this. And he shows the pictures of the killing fields and the pictures of the Khmer Rouge. And he says, "But I'm going to tell you a story about this part of Cambodia." And he starts talking about bands and music and life, and you sort of think, man, I'm with this guy. He is highly charismatic, and he is the one who breaks the fourth wall and pulls the audience in and teaches them, just like Leguizamo teaches you about Latin American history. The MC teaches you about what is going on in Cambodia and why you should visit. And then it is revealed, this is a spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen this show. It happens, oh, I don't know, like a quarter of the way through Act 1 or a third of the way through Act 1. He suddenly reveals that he is actually the head jailer of the horrible camp, concentration camp slash death camp that he was in charge of, a former public school that is now a death camp for the Khmer Rouge. And he says, and so this is me, and his name is Doik. And so Doik says, so I'm the one who's been talking to you this whole time. And everyone in the audience goes, boo, or at least they did when I was there. Sort of a pantomime-esque, you're the bad guy. And he's like, oh yeah, boo, boo, boo. And then he ends up interrupting the story of the main character and telling his story instead. And he says, and so since this is when I enter the story, now this is when it gets a lot more interesting. So the author of Cambodian Rock Band is the great Lauren Yee, also one of the producers of Interior Chinatown. Laura Yee is doing amazing stuff. Can't wait for more from her. The other MC that I wanted to talk about is the MC from Cabaret. So Cabaret's been around for a while now, and I think one of the most iconic recordings was Joel Grey as the MC. He won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar, and he was very much a trickster or a joker navigating between the audience and what was happening in the movie or what happens on stage. And in this most recent production, Adam Lambert is playing the MC. So I don't know if you saw this, Avery, but there is one particular song in the show called If You Could See Her Through My Eyes. And it's when Berlin is becoming more and more in the grip of the Nazi Party. So Cabaret takes place in the years between World War One and World War Two, and the Nazis are slowly gaining power, slowly. And so the composition of the Kit Kat Club is changing. And you kind of start understanding that there's a shift, and the performers are starting to cater to a Nazi sensibility and sense of humor. If You Could See Her Through My Eyes is a song with a very specific perception shift. You're led down the garden path, and you think that it's a silly story about a man and his girlfriend who doesn't seem to fit with him. And then the hammer drops at the very end of that song, and it becomes an anti Semitic joke. And Adam Lambert, over the past few weeks, maybe months, because the audience has not seemed to understand this. And so Adam Lambert, in character as the MC, if they start laughing at this anti Semitic joke, steps down to the downstage center. So for our listeners who are not theater people, that's kind of the front of the stage, right in the middle of the stage. It's very commonly associated with breaking the fourth wall, and says, "That's not funny. That is not a joke." And explains to the audience that was anti Semitic and you're not supposed to laugh at that. I was stunned when I saw this because that's not a part of that. It's not in the script for the show as written, but Lambert took it upon himself not to let the laughter get out of control and not to let people get away with um, appreciating or laughing at anti-Semitic humor. Just something really fascinating.
I know another playwright that has characters often break the fourth wall is William Shakespeare, and one of the shows I'm currently working on is The Winter's Tale, in which there is a character named Autolycus in the second part of the story, and he is a grifter. He comically sings, he steals from others, he sells his stolen wares, he travels around. And in our show, we made him like a giant pack made out of crates and sticks and just with a bunch of his stolen goods in it. And some of his quotes of while he's, whittling down people's to wallets is, haha, what a fool honesty is, and trust his sworn brother, a very simple gentleman. And he's kind of commenting on human morality, I guess, and on honesty itself, and how he's just like, dang, people are so silly. And he's telling this directly to the audience, too. And then to another character, he says, though I'm not naturally honest, I am so sometimes by chance. So he's very much all about not being honest and but only being honest when he needs to, and basically playing the game of deception. If he were a Dungeons and Dragons character, he would be rolling very high on deception very oftentimes during this play because he steals other people's like clothes, he trades clothes, he pretends to be a noble for a second. He sells his stuff like a very good salesman, and nobody is any the wiser. Another character we know and love from Shakespeare is Puck from A Midsummer Night's Dream. And Puck is kind of a fairy, kind of a traveler as well. Not as much of a traveler, but more so a wanderer. And Puck describes themselves as that merry wanderer of the night. And they love, I say they just because I've seen so much analysis of like what gender Puck could be, and it could I think they could be any gender in my opinion, whether it's a binary gender or a non-binary gender, because they describe themselves as like being able to transform into different animals and just having kind of a fluid form and being this trickster that finds humor in messing around with others. And they're not even immortal, so like what kind of gender, it's up to the actor or whatever. So, Puck also says, Lord, what fools these mortals be. And another instance of commenting directly to the audience of like, oh my god, can you look at these characters? Aren't they being so silly? And Puck is kind of the connection, between the audience and the characters on stage. And the famous ending quote that Puck says at the end of this crazy comedy adventure of Midsummer Night's Dream is, if we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear. And this quote is basically saying, hey, audience, just in case you're offended or anything, this was just a huge act of play, a dream, if you will. Think nothing of it. But if you had fun, hope you had fun. Good night, peace out. Kind of vibes. Shakespeare's Joker characters are very much comedic relief. They have such a wide application of comedic relief, and they have a very important part to play in a comedy story, but also in drama stories as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I wonder about the Jokers in stories like Midsummer. Do they have a stake in what's going on in the story? Or are they there to keep us off balance? Tricksters in animal tales like Anansi the spider or Coyote in Native American tales, they typically figure out ways to get what they want, just like the character from A Winter's Tale who's like, I can't believe what I can get away with here. I can't believe I totally pulled the wool over your eyes.
Yeah.
That's very typical. Also, if you look back at mythology, gods like Hermes, or especially gods like Loki, the god of mischief, and our favorite Marvel representation of Loki, and the idea of, trouble is good sometimes. Putting people off balance is good sometimes. Reminding people that chaos lurks right outside their door. And even if they might have wonderful plans, and if they think that they might be absolutely secure, something could come and shake them up. Chaos could happen. And these characters sometimes glory in causing chaos, like Puck or like Loki. I think the question comes when you put madness into the mix. So I'm sure some of our listeners are wondering if we're going to get to the character Joker from Batman. So let's talk about the Joker and other characters who are specifically called out as mad, crazy. So I guess the question is, what does madness cause these characters to do? We can talk about the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland, who kind of delays her for a while, but doesn't harm Alice. just kind of introduces her to another way of seeing the world, seeing Wonderland, and tries to get her to expand her mind a little bit about what tea time is and what it means to sit down and have tea. Willy Wonka, I'm thinking specifically of the version played by the great Gene Wilder in the 1970s version. Shout out to my Gen X folks who grew up with this that terrified us as kids. Willy Wonka, I mean, literally, his introduction is to put us off balance. He trips and falls, but then stands up in complete control of his body. He takes the kids on this boat ride, the very famous boat ride where there are all these scary things, and he's not telling them if they're actually going into this tunnel and something could harm them or not. He brings them into the chocolate factory, and based on what the kids do, the kids get sucked into tubes. They go into perhaps the garbage chute. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. Is Willy Wonka mad? Is he cruel? I think it's kind of up to the audience to figure that out. And then the Joker from Batman. And I suppose we should ask the question, which version of the
Hmm.
Joker from Batman? There have been so many. The comics version famously had he wanted his backstory to be multiple choice, right? He didn't ever want to say, this is how I became who I am. But the Joker is there to challenge Batman and to put Gotham on notice that they are not safe. In the movie The Dark Knight, famously he is described as just wanting to watch the world burn. In the comics, he often will have ha 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 written all around him when he's laughing. Just kind of, is he laughing or is he laughing in his mind? And then the most recent, the Joaquin Phoenix Joker, which just kind of right up front, I was not a fan of this approach. I know that it did very well and a lot of people loved it, but for me it kind of cut against what the Joker is supposed to be, and they came up with a long description for exactly what kind of challenges he has. He has this kind of Tourette's like uncontrollable laugh that makes him a target for people, and he essentially, his upbringing and the way he's been treated by society has pushed him around so much that he has become in scare quotes mentally ill, and that is what is causing him to take out violence and destruction on the city of Gotham. And I don't know. I it it seemed to me like an easy answer for a character who is not supposed to have easy answers. Famously, he has said that it was the result of one bad day, right? One bad day can change someone, can turn them into a version of themselves that they don't want to be. And this was specifically showing the one bad day or series of bad days for Arthur Fleck. I as a kid grew up with the Joker from the 1960s. They did reruns of the old Batman 1960s campy thing, and so Cesar Romero was the Joker, and he always seemed like a very goofy but not necessarily sinister. He definitely wanted to mess with Gotham, but he never got that close to actually killing people. He would threaten them, but then they would be saved. Hooray! That kind of thing. And then Jack Nicholson played the Joker in the Tim Burton version and kind of changed that character and what he was trying to do, because he was trying to get revenge on the mob that had kind of set him up. So he was as angry with the bad guys as he was with Batman or with the other Gothamites. So there are my thoughts on the Joker. A really fascinating character, probably if not the primary supervillain in comics lore in the top in the top 3. And that was kind of what I thought when I figured, oh, we might want to talk about specifically this character who's derived from the Joker on playing cards, but has become kind of an iconic villain.
Yeah. And I don't know much about the Joker, but it does remind me of the Joker and Harley Quinn's cyclically abusive relationship
Yeah,
that
definitely.
involves a lot of intimate partner violence throughout all of its iterations. And it's interesting that Harley Quinn's character is also derived from the Jester character, which is another kind of iteration of Joker character too. But speaking of the origins of Jokers themselves,
Yeah.
I mean, specifically with the card deck. So backing it up to the modern 52 card deck, where did that come from? The 78 card tarot deck was likely the beginning of that with its major arcana and minor arcana. So the major arcana is stuff like the Fool, the World, the Sun, the Stars, the Moon, and other concepts, whereas the minor arcana are mostly numbers with different suits. And the Joker card itself likely evolved as a permanent trump card, specifically in British euchre. But the closest card in the tarot deck is the Fool, which is sometimes numbered first in the major arcana. And the Fool character is its earliest depiction is as a beggar or a vagabond, but nowadays it's usually depicted as a young explorer at the precipice of something. My sister just gifted me a deck inspired by architecture, and the Fool character is an architect, like about to start, a project. And I think it's a very iconic part of the tarot deck is the Fool character because the major arcana are supposed to symbolize the journey of the Fool. So the Fool goes from like knowing nothing about the world basically to wandering through all of the parts of the world, and then finally the World card, which is the last card in major arcana, is where they arrive at. And it's kind of this cycle of life journey that the Fool's beginning footsteps are a big representation of that part. So just some interesting lore for you. Um, but one of my favorite games last year and this past year has been Balatro, which is a roguelike deck building game with poker mechanics. It's single player, and the word Balatro means Joker in Latin. And I previously talked about this on our Playing Money episode, where we talked about playing with and taking risks. So this game is narrated or even jokered by Jimbo the Joker, and throughout your playthrough, you're just trying to set up different poker hands in order to get the most points, basically. And you just want to like keep getting more and more until you defeat the game. But along your journey, you can have up to 5 different jokers as you play through the challenges. And each different joker is a different theme, and it each has a different ability, like a modifier that it'll add more of this number or it'll multiply this number or whatever. And they're kind of what make every single playthrough different. And going through exploring the game and collecting all the different jokers is a very fun time. And I just thought it was a very amazing analogy for how having a different kind of joker in any game makes the whole game completely different. And it's very, very cool game. Highly recommend.
That sounds fantastic. I got to check that out. I love getting more ideas for board games or video games to try when I do these podcasts, Avery. It is
Yeah.
awesome.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
I think that our last sort of subtopic here before we go into final thoughts is what happens when you are in a joking space or a funny space or a fun space. So we can gather comedy clubs or shows, magic shows, or immersive experiences like fun houses, escape rooms. or even being caught in a prank. And
Mm.
it's interesting to think, okay, are you the target of the joke, or are you laughing? And is there a target? So with comedy clubs, is everyone around you laughing? What do you do if you are not feeling the mirth that other people are feeling? I remember there was a show that I went to one time where the narrator or the MC kind of made an ethnic joke having to do with a certain Latin American identity and poverty, and the whole place started laughing, and I was shocked. I just sat there and kind of looked around. What do you do? Do you kind of disrupt? Do you leave? Do you pointedly not laugh and just let the person move through? I don't know, but it was an uncomfortable moment. Magic shows, or I think you may talk about hypnotism, the Joker with hidden information, the knowledge of the trick. How is the trick done? And the audience members sometimes get pulled up, and it's not exactly like the joke is on them. The joke is on everyone who does not know how the trick works. But participating in the joke, the trick, there's a reason they're called tricks, right? Because they trick you. And although, if you're talking about Arrested Development, the character of Job would say, they're not tricks, they're illusions. Just want to throw out that for my Arrested Development fans. So, hidden information, fun houses, distortions, mirrors that distort your image of yourself. Where are you going? Where are you supposed to go? Is there danger lurking around the corner? And then being pranked does not feel good. I will just say it right now. Being pranked does not feel good. There was a whole thing in Girls Five Eva, the show Girls Five Eva. I don't know if you've seen that, Avery, but it's about like a former
Uh-uh.
'90s girl group that gets back together. And there's one episode where, let's just say, the pranks go too far, and it just becomes kind of cringe. When are pranks appropriate? Who is appropriate to prank? Is pranking punching up? And what happens when a prank gets out of control? These are all really interesting questions about when does something cross the line from funny to not funny. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one of the shows that I saw when I visited California in January was that of Ashley Gavin. And I think we were at Irvine Improv. And and she is a gay woman who really, that's a lot of what her content is about. And she did a lot of crowd work, which is when the comedian kind of interacts with the first few rows, specifically, talking to them about like, hey, who are you? Where are you from? Why do you look like a old professor? And also interacting with the rest of the crowd of like, through and through. And I think it was funny in the moment because she was basically making fun of the people in her front rows. There were people who definitely had the hots for her, people who were like confused, and we were laughing at. The show had a lot of focus on the audience members, and while it was funny in the moment, when I left, I felt like I didn't really know more about her as a person, which was what I would have probably preferred. I think because like when I when I say I like Josh Johnson so much, it's because of his storytelling. Whereas Ashley did have like a lot of storytelling, but mostly related to like sexual experiences or smaller things. And I didn't really leave the show learning more about like their life or her just deeper stuff. I think that's probably just me. Like I just probably prefer deeper stuff when it comes to comedy, whereas I'm sure there were other people who maybe that was their favorite show of all time. I also grew up seeing like comedy hypnotists and magicians at fairgrounds or other events. And yeah, you're very right about like the illusion of it all. Like there's a lot of rehearsal that goes into it. And even there was this one show I watched as a kid where it was like a masked magician, and then after the commercial break, he would like reveal how he did his tricks, and I thought that was really cool, because you get to finally be in on the illusion too. And I have also played a lot of escape rooms, and I've also worked as a game master at an escape room. And when you are playing a character in the room, you can be either like just the voice. So maybe you are voicing the a painting, like I did, like I played in a room in California once. Like you are the voice of a real life painting, and you get to give people hints, make fun of them because it's like a circus themed room, and or there was also one that was like a magical plant puppet that was talking to us. And then there there are also opportunities for a real whole live actor to be in with you. Like when I played The Last Supper at Quest Tavern, the name of the character Lord who was with us was Lord Garrick, and he was very intimidating. He had a massive sword that we were supposed to like exorcise. We had to at one point try to grab his keys off his belt, which was very nerve-wracking, and he was just so intimidating. And he was like, well, I'm gonna leave to get your meal. Now if I see any item out of place when I come back, it's gonna be the end of you or whatever. And we were genuinely terrified.
Oh,
And yeah, I highly recommend this game. But the fact that, because when you're playing an escape room, usually you just tear it apart and you're like, oh, what's there? Let's find all these clues. But the fact that we had an extra objective to put everything back together as we found it was extra just heart pumping and very, very exciting. Um, and he was also like he was both funny too. I think he was asking like what are our names or like what are our jobs, and I wasn't sure if we were supposed to role play or not, so I was like, I'm a rogue, and he was like, okay, I was just trying to ask you what you do. Interesting. And we were all like giving like, yeah, I'm a bard, I'm a barbarian, but he was just like, okay, sometimes people just say they're an accountant or something, but okay, we'll go with this.
that is
But
great. I love
yeah,
that.
as somebody who has also run a lot of escape room groups, like some escape rooms also have a TV screen where I can like type out hints and show them how much time they have. And sometimes they would communicate with me in funny ways, and I would put like a smiley face on the TV or something for them. Or when I would run the horror themed escape room, we would do like a creepy voice through a voice modulator through it. So all in all, I think the escape room experience is very dependent on the game master that you have and the joker that you have with you, because even the like I don't think escape rooms would be the same if you were just dropped into a installation room and then left to wander through it and find stuff. I think the premise of the escape room needs the Joker character in some form to tie you to the plot and the objective and what you have to do.
Yeah, agreed. And that's what makes an escape room different from, like you said, an installation like Meow Wolf, where
Yeah.
Meow Wolf is more open world, you're exploring. Sometimes you can find an objective in a way, but most of it is just trying to understand where are you, when are you, who are you, and what is this space, this imaginative, beautiful space that's been created.
Yeah.
Well, I think before we do sort of final thoughts, I wonder about the people who tell jokes and why they tell them, people who use themselves as the butt of the joke, people who use others as the butt of the joke. We've talked quite a bit about this. It does seem to have something to do, at least to me, it seems to have something to do with holding power, taking power, not letting other people have power, i.e., I'm going to make fun. I'm going to tell short jokes about myself so that other people won't tell short jokes about me. Or
Mhm.
that was what Hannah Gatsby was talking about, and then she kind of took control and she said, "No, I'm not going to do that anymore." But having secret knowledge, knowing that there's something that you know, or knowing that there's something funny that you're going to challenge somebody with, and how you challenge them is up to you. I really do think there's a power component in this. And Freud talked a lot about jokes and humor, and his thoughts were that it was part of the unconscious, that jokes helped us work out our fears and our desires, that things came out in jokes the same way they came out in dreams. And they're also a way to get further into ourselves and the things that we wish weren't as funny as perhaps the world has made them, right? The fact that the world sometimes is absurd, and we wish that it were less absurd or less chaotic. And so maybe in this tiny way, we can come up with a way to laugh back at the world or laugh back at our place in it. And
Mhm.
do you have any final thoughts before I tell one last dad joke?
Oh gosh. If I were to ever be an actor, I would love to play Puck in Midsummer Night's
Oh,
Dream. Not that I
yeah.
am an actor right now, but I think I wonder what it is like to fully embody those kinds of roles that are really all about play and messing with people in especially as a magical fairy in a magical forest. But as a scenic designer, I'm glad that I get to work on these settings around these kinds of stories because, gosh, when you get to watch Autolycus steal stuff during your rehearsals on your set, ugh, it's so satisfying. But yeah, that's my final thought.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I got this last dad joke from a fellow dad, my Uncle
Okay.
Gary. Here it is.
hmm
Avery, what do runners eat before a race?
what did they eat?
Nothing. They fast. We'll see you next month, listeners.
This has been Powered by Play with Avery and Drew. If you've been enjoying this podcast, you can support us online at Ko-fi. That is ko-fi.com/poweredbyplay. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.